Good morning and good afternoon to everyone tuning in today. It's a really exciting time as we get ready to look at the second round of the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program. And I'm really excited to especially be joined by a great panel and lineup this afternoon as we both go through what has been recently announced in terms of the grant funding opportunity and resources and material that's available for everyone that's interested to be looking at new applications. I'm Matt Stevens-Rich with the Electrification Coalition, and I'm really excited, especially as both the Electrification Coalition and Fourth are partnering together and getting various educational resource and material, starting off with this webinar today, to be great resource and go-to for various partners that are looking at these projects. A really big piece to why we do this is we shared a collective mission on looking at how we can expand and accelerate transportation electrification across the space, especially working with various federal partners and programs available through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. So it's our hope today. It's going to be a very dense and jam-packed 45 minutes. But those of you that might not be familiar with the program, we can quickly go through it and give you the high-level moments, and also be able to go through what are helpful next steps as you look at what project potential could look like. A little bit about whom our organizations are. So first, Fourth. Fourth is a nonprofit organization that envisions a world where clean and equitable transportation systems move everyone and everything. Their collective mission, just as I mentioned, is to electrify transportation by bringing people together and to create solutions that reduce pollution and barriers to access. The EC, Electrification Coalition, so we are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that also looks to develop and implement a broad set of strategies to facilitate widespread adoption of electric vehicles. We come at this with a perspective of bringing betterment to economic, public health, and national security challenges, especially those that stem from America's dependence on oil. And to round this out, we have partners from both organizations as well as from the Joint Office joining today, whom we'll be going through respective session sets. I'll run through a quick introduction here, and then we'll get underway in our presentations. So first, who will be kicking us off is Kevin Miller, Senior Advisor for Business Models at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Those of you that might not be familiar with the Joint Office, this is a special office that was set up to help get better directive out around the bipartisan infrastructure law, staffed by federal staff across various federal agencies, and is a great go-to resource, especially in these moments, to understand what is the potential for funding projects. Followed by that, Brant Hertenstein, Program Manager at the Electrification Coalition, will walk us through some comparison, especially those that might be familiar with the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program in the first round that came out last year. So we especially want to be sure to go through what's changed, what remained the same, and what are new opportunities made available. And then finally, Kat Pline, Development and Communications Director at Fourth, will also walk us through some of those next steps, tools, and resources. Be warned, we have a lot of great links that are going to be coming your way, but at the same time, we are always glad to follow up and connect with folks after this webinar to get you resources that you need. As we proceed throughout this webinar, please do drop your questions into the chat. We'll be keeping tabs of that and be feeding that into a Q&A at the end of the session, where I'll come back on and do a moderated panel and quick succession. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Kevin, who will kick us off and really walk us through both, for those, again, that maybe you looked at something around the CFI program, but it's been a while. We'll be walking through that and also getting to understand some more perspective from the Joint Office. So thank you so much for joining us, Kevin, and I'll give the floor to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you to Fourth and to the Electrification Coalition for hosting this really valuable webinar and convening this discussion and making all these resources available. I won't reintroduce myself too much. I'm Kevin Miller, Senior Advisor at the Joint Office. For context, the Joint Office, as Matt mentioned, we are there to provide a whole variety of technical support and assistance, really serving as the connective tissue as a joint office between the United States Department of Transportation, the United States Department of Energy, as well as partnering with agencies across federal government, cities and towns, state DOTs, and really looking forward to giving you a brief summary of the program and to make sure that you're attuned to resources that our partners at the Federal Highway Administration, which published this funding opportunity, are making available, which goes into much further detail. This is just scratching the surface, and so looking forward to talking with you about this. For context, the Charging, Fueling, and Infrastructure Program is part and parcel of implementing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which aligns with the administration's goal to build a network of publicly available EV charging infrastructure, as well as the other eligible fuels for the Charging, Fueling, and Infrastructure Program is authorized by Congress. We're seeing new infrastructure for EVs, for hydrogen vehicles, as well as the other eligible fuels, propane and natural gas. New charging and refueling infrastructure comes online every week, thanks to a combination of direct funding, state action, as well as a lot of the private sector investment that's really exciting out there in the market for alternative fuel vehicles. The CFI program is just one of many that directs federal investments to states, local governments, and other eligible entities to fill critical gaps in the nation's growing network of EV, hydrogen, and other alternative fuel vehicles to ensure that everyone can ride and drive electric. So I'll give a quick summary now, walking through some of the slides. If you're watching this, you're aware that CFI Round 2 is open. So this $1.3 billion funding opportunity is made up of a lot of different components, which we'll go through over the course of this discussion. If you're the type who loves getting into details, or if you're thinking of applying, I highly encourage you to look at some of these detailed webinars that have recently been put on by the Federal Highway Administration. In the next week or so, those resources, those recorded webinars will be made available, and there will be resources that will be circulated after this webinar as well. But there's going to be a lot to go through, so I will finish up my high-level summary and then pass it off to the other panelists to dig into more detail. At a high level, you would need to know that this funding opportunity has multiple components. The two biggest components to keep in mind is that there is a round 2 component. This is for new applications, as well as a component that will reconsider previously submitted but not awarded applications from the first round of the CFI program. So for new applicants, there's $800 million available. There's a deadline for these new applications at the end of August that you see below on the screen. For round 1, funding has been reserved to target highly recommended and recommended applications. The Federal Highway Administration will have reached out to applicants. If you have any questions about whether or not you are one of those who could be eligible for reconsideration, we'll have some contact information later on, but you should have already received a request for being reconsidered with this additional funding. So it's a combination of looking at some of the fantastic applications that were submitted in the first round of this program, as well as looking at new applications with some new considerations for round 2. If you're not already familiar with how the program is structured, the CFI program is split into 2 equally funded components, one for community programs and one for corridor programs. We'll go through some of those requirements, but again, please make sure that you go through all of those requirements as listed in the NOFO and as discussed in the Federal Highway Administration's webinar, as well as all of the great resources that the other panelists will point you to. We're going to talk through all the ways in which there are some slight differences between round 2 and round 1. One key piece to look at on the corridor side is there is a change in the maximum distance from an alternative fueled corridor, which is designated by a state through a process with the Federal Highway Administration. So EV charging projects can be located up to 5 miles away from a corridor, which is a change from round 1 where that distance was 1 mile. And that aligns the distances across all CFI eligible fuels. I'm not going to read all of these, but I will pause or maybe vamp long enough to say that there are specific requirements for the community program, specific project areas that you'll need to review in detail and consider how best they could encapsulate any potential application. A lot of detailed considerations, again, that can be supported by review of FHWA and other resources that will be discussed later in this webinar. But please be aware that there are requirements that are specific to community programs that are different than requirements for corridor programs. Again, this is not the end-all be-all. This is not a different version of the NOFO. Please make sure that you review the detailed contents of the NOFO. We're going through at a rapid clip to make sure that we can cover a lot of content as quickly as possible. One piece that I do want to point out, at the bottom of this page, you see that there's a reference to the Zero Emission Freight Strategy, which was published by the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation in March of this year. I'll flag that there are references in both the community and in the corridor programs under certain project categories. So in the community fleets and freight project category under the community program, there's a reference to alignment with the maps in phases 1, 2, or 3 of the Zero Emission Freight Corridor Strategy. And there's a reference on the corridor side to alignment with phases 1 or 2 of the Zero Emission Freight Corridor Strategy. That strategy document contains maps to prioritize where federal investments for zero emission freight, so zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicle infrastructure projects are awarded. And so just be aware that in addition to looking at resources in the NOFO, there are going to be other considerations outside of that NOFO that are referenced and linked in that NOFO document. Just wanted to flag that there is a coordination across all of our federal efforts to ensure that we get the most value at the fastest pace and that best aligns with where the market's at and helps best to accelerate the development of that market with a sustainable and scalable growth. There are eligible entities that are particular to some aspects of the program. At the very bottom, you see that there is one group of eligible entities, state or local authorities with ownership of public access transportation facilities. That's unique to community programs. But aside from that, in order to apply for this program, you must be one of these eligible entities. But as noted in a previous slide, the expectation is that partnerships with private developers, with other stakeholders, community groups, there's no limit to how these eligible entities can bring in additional partnerships to help achieve those goals. But again, please do reference the details of the NOFO to ensure that the proposal that you might be preparing is consistent with the requirements in order to ensure that what you submit can actually be evaluated. If you do have questions about the program that are specific to any of the technical requirements, any of the eligibility criteria, I'd highly encourage you to submit those questions by email to the address on this slide by the end of July in order to get a response. But if you have the question now, no need to keep it a secret. I think the more prepared that any individual applicant can be, the sooner the better. So please make sure to gather all those questions. The Joint Office is proud to support the Federal Highway Administration in this and to provide resources and technical assistance. But for NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity specific questions, the best way to get those questions answered is to direct them to FHWA's CFI team at cfigrants@dot.gov. So I'll pause there. I think I might have already run through all my time. So thank you for the opportunity to present at a high level what we're looking at. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about all the additional resources that are out there, some of which come from the Joint Office. But this is a really exciting opportunity for the market for decarbonizing the transportation sector from light to medium to heavy duty vehicles, and really excited to see the creativity out there and what gets submitted.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that walkthrough, Kevin, and taking us a little bit more into the weeds and elements there. Again, and as you can see on your screen, please do keep the questions coming. We already have a couple good ones coming right through. We're keeping track of that. We'll be looping that into a Q&A after Kat's presentation. So do keep those questions coming. In the meantime, I'll hand it off to Brant, who's going to walk us through some comparison between CFI rounds 1, round 2, and also be sure to highlight some of the key distinctions that Kevin actually was bringing up. So Brant, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you, Kevin, for that great overview of the charging and fueling infrastructure for round 2. So the goal for this portion of the presentation is to look back at what we saw in the round 1 NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and then calculate what the differences are in round 2, so that we know what changes have been made and what things we can be adding to our application for those that may have not been awarded in round 1 but do want to go for a round 2 application. Excuse me. This list is not comprehensive, so what I've done is try to take pretty much like the top 10 takeaways of comparisons. So this is not an exhaustive list. The EC, the Electrification Coalition, will be putting out a comprehensive list on their resource page once we get it finalized. But for now, we're just going to focus on the main things that will apply to you, the applicant, moving forward. So the first thing is something that that Kevin kind of touched upon, but I want to kind of go a little bit more in depth. So round 1 had $700 million of funding. Round 2 was projected to have only $500 million awarded. However, with the addition of the charging and fueling infrastructure from fiscal year 24, the charging and fueling infrastructure fiscal year 25, along with the complementary NEVI 10% set aside funding, which was collectively, I believe, $212 million. We now have a purse of $1.3 billion to award. And then Kevin did a great job of breaking down how that $1.3 billion is awarded. So it's been great. In round 1, there was 535 applications that were awarded. There was over $3 billion requested with all those applications. And so the Federal Highway Administration responded by offering that much more money for this round of funding. And so we are seeing that there's a significant amount of money being invested into charging and fueling infrastructure around our country. I would like to note that if you are familiar with the NEVI funding, which is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, that is supposed to build out a minimum practical network of DC fast chargings across our nation's interstates and highways, that initial 10% set aside, which is 10% of the funding year for that particular program, was approximately $100 million in fiscal year 23, is being used in 24 and 25. So the electric vehicle charging reliability accessibility accelerator is not going to be included in or will not be used for that money again this year. So the next time we would see it is most likely in fiscal year 26 from if at all, from the NEVI fund. So another thing that is different about the round 1 and round 2 is the way that we're going to be submitting our applications. In the first round, you could submit a one application, and both the community and core program could have been applied for, and then the Federal Highway Administration and the reviewers determined which program was being applied for. This year, it's a little bit different. In round 2, you can submit a corridor application, and then you can also submit a community application. Or you can apply for both of them, but within the application, you must specify which part of the application you're talking about. So if you're going that route, if you have project merit criteria, you need to be able to address the project merit criteria for both round 1 and then for community, and then for a second merit criteria, you'll have to talk about your corridor project criteria. So just keep in mind that it is probably it would be probably in your best interest if you separated them out, because we'll talk about later. There is a page requirement for the second round of funding, which was not a requirement in round one. So here's a table of exactly what is how it is allocated. So Kevin touched upon this a little bit, but this is exactly where all of the funding is coming from. So if anybody had any questions on how did it balloon from 500 million to 1.3 billion dollars, this is the table that summarizes it perfectly on where that money is coming from and exactly what part of money is going to what application round it is. So as Kevin alluded to, on the far right part of this table, $521 million is going to the previously submitted applications in round one. 800 million is going for the applications that are submitted in round two, for a total of $1.3 billion. Also keep in mind, for those that are interested in submitting their application from round one, you are also allowed to submit in round two. So you want to maximize your chances of getting this funding by going for both the opportunity in round one and in round two. So I alluded to that there is a page limit. So in round one, there was no page limit on the application. And this year there is. It's to not exceed 25 pages. And so when we were helping people, applicants out with their narrative documents, we saw a lot of applications get up to 60, 70 pages. We even saw one that was over 100 pages. That is not going to be allowed anymore. So we really need to consolidate and make sure that our writing is efficient in our narrative documentation. So there can be no more than 25 pages for the project narrative, the budget information, the project merit criteria, and the project readiness and environmental risk. I think the federal government or the reviewers have said that these were probably too long. It delayed getting the award funding out, and so this is going to make sure that we have a really concise application that we can then review very quickly and get the ball rolling and moving on to the federal funding awards getting out and then implemented. Because in an ideal world, we're getting this money out as quickly as possible and into the ground. So Kevin also alluded to this, but I do want to bring it up one more time. So alternative fuel corridor sites for corridor projects used to be that it had to be no greater than 1 mile from an exit or highway intersection. In round two, they've expanded that to 5 miles. If anybody's familiar with alternative fuel corridors and the way it's gone over the course of the year, it originally was 5 miles for all alternative fuels, including CNG and propane and hydrogen. With the implementation of NEVI, we wanted those sites to be closer to the highway, so it would be easier for EVs to access those charging stations. But this round of funding has expanded it to 5 miles, and that's really helpful. So we're supposed to be complementing NEVI and filling in regional gaps. This allows us for states that have hard to access locations, little to nothing at exits where you had to travel 5 miles in our rural locations to get to any sort of town. Any power restrictions out there that may have prohibited you from putting it into that 1 mile, you now have the ability to expand your radius to 5 miles in order to put charging into place. So this is a huge opportunity to expand our EV infrastructure for DC fast charging that otherwise you wouldn't be able to get to NEVI funding through NEVI funding. And I just want to emphasize that whenever we're talking about putting DC fast charging into our interstates and highways, the CFI funding is there for those that would absolutely not be able to put in DC fast charging if it wasn't for the help with the federal government and the CFI program. So this was a point of contention in round one. It's great that the FHWA and the Joint Office listened to our feedback and what we can do to make round two better. In round one, the proposed chargers had to be in a publicly accessible location, and any location that had required a parking fee or a barrier to enter were not permitted. That has now changed. So parking structures that do have a barrier to enter or a fee to enter are allowable, as long as you can build into your application that the cost structure is including the parking fee to get into the site. And so we know that this was a barrier in round one. This is now an eligible project in round two, and so this is going to open up a significant amount of more opportunities, both in our cities and other locations throughout the United States to expand EV deployment. So in round one, sorry, not in round one, Justice 40 has been a landmark and recurring theme in many programs from the federal government. Justice 40 has typically been defined as directing 40% of overall benefits of certain federal investments to flow into disadvantaged communities. In round two, it actually gives a little bit more specifications, so you know exactly what a Justice 40 area is. And so those are defined below within tribal land owned by federally recognized tribes, within a rural community, which is outside of a census-defined urbanized area. In the NOFO, it has a link to the urbanized area, so you know exactly what you should be looking at to determine whether or not you are a rural community or not. Disadvantaged community and a census-defined urbanized area. I assure you they also have mapping tools that will tell you whether or not your area is a disadvantaged community or not. And then, of course, that the 40% of overall benefits of certain federal investments, you now know that needs to be within a half-mile buffer of a disadvantaged community in a census-defined urbanized area, so that you know exactly what you need to put in your project merit criteria whenever you're talking about Justice 40, which is great. There's some sense of confusion along Justice 40, but this gives a much better indication of what you need to do. So this was a little bit in this one there was a little bit difference in terms of the way that they talked about private entities. And so in round one, for quarter programs, it was mandatory. For community programs that you may have been able to, you had to hold the private entity responsible for the non-federal share. So the federal match is 80%, and so the non-federal share that had to be from someone else was the 20%. That is the minimum requirement. Of course, in your application, you can ask for more, which may make your application more competitive. But in this one, applicants are not in violation on the grant agreement if they make a substantial effort to get the private entity to pay the non-federal share, and for some reason they weren't able to execute that contract. Of course, the lead applicant is always responsible for the non-federal cost share, but this doesn't make your application or the grant agreement in violation, which is a key component of making everything work and smooth out the process. All right. So in round one, it specifically says, and it says this in round two as well, that it needs to be located on any public road or in any other publicly accessible locations. In round two, there's additional considerations for community charging, specifically revolved around neighborhood and multifamily charging. And within the application, it says that it must provide convenient, affordable access to charging infrastructure in public or shared private locations. This suggests that you may be able to put into your applications apartment complex communities that are perhaps behind the fence. Ultimately, what it means is that there's a better chance of expanding EV deployment throughout our neighborhoods and cities with this language being inputted into the NOFO. So as I talked about, we talked about additional project narratives. Some of the differences, one of the things that was really nice about the NOFO in round two was it gave you the areas in which the priorities were. So we know that in both the corridor and community project, the number one evaluation criteria is going to be the project merit criteria. And then it goes down into the statutory requirements, our statutory priorities for the community program, and then it goes down to additional considerations. And so within those additional considerations, the round two has shifted the project narrative categories between round one and round two. And here we just wanted to outline what it was. So in the bolded part is on the left-hand side, you can see what the additional project narrative for the community portion of the funding was in 2023. And then the next column you see is the 2024 project narrative for community. And then you can see in the third column is the additional project narrative for the corridor section in 2023 and how it's changed in the final column on column 4 in 2024. So, some things have changed, some things have stayed the same, but for anybody to, for everyone to understand that there are new priorities, don't necessarily just copy and paste your application from round 1 to round 2, because there are differences between them, and we want to make sure that we capitalize on the differences and make sure that we align with the priorities and goals of the Federal Highway Administration. And I think that's it.
Great. Thanks for that breakdown, Brant. Definitely helpful to go a little bit more into the weeds, as some of this language looks familiar, but it's also going to be new. We're going to round out the presentation sets. I'll hand it off to my great colleague, Kat Fline at Fourth, who's going to walk through some resources and other things that we have on top of our radar, especially to help out partners as they're working through. So, Kat, I'll give it to you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Brant, for the analysis. That was great. First, I want to acknowledge that it can be really challenging and resource intensive just to apply for a CFI grant. So we're really hopeful some of the advice, resources, and space for technical assistance that we're offering today can help lighten the load. So first off, to uplift Kevin's presentation, and we've seen the chat, it is popping with questions. Really want to underscore cfigrants@dot.gov for any of your questions related to the NOFO. So make sure you pin that email address. I also want to uplift a really great resource from the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which is their Public Electric Vehicle Charging Infrastructure Playbook. So also from the Fourth side, we can assist communities seeking CFI funding in the following ways. So one, we're able to provide general advice and technical assistance associated with your program design and application. We can also talk with you a little bit about that funding match support. Lots of questions about that. How do I get to that at least 20% necessary project cost share? And we can also help you design meaningful public engagement programs allowed under the NOFO. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. And we can also provide access to resources, so things like this webinar, lots of reports, and other tools to help aid your application. So if you're interested in technical assistance from Fourth, there should be a form popping up or a link popping up in the chat right now where you can fill that out, and then somebody from the Fourth team will get in touch. And just a note, everyone will be getting all these resources in a follow-up recap email from Symbiot. So thank you in advance, Symbiot. So no need to grab these all at haste. Resources from the Electrification Coalition side that can support your project design and application creation can be found under their CFI Resource Hub. It's a really great resource, y'all. It features new resources for round 2 and popular resources from round 1 that have been updated. First, that chart that Brant alluded to and is on the right of this slide will be all in one document. It's a really easy round 1 versus round 2 comparison. So you can easily identify and then make any changes to your application. Also, the updated community and corridor outlines that are in that resource hub are helpful if you're starting an application from scratch and don't know where to begin, or to check your new application to ensure you included all the necessary information. All of their resources from round 1 that are still relevant for round 2 remain on that hub, including a flow chart to help you determine project focus. So be sure to check out all those resources, and you can always email infrastructure@electrificationcoalition.org. Again, infrastructure@electrificationcoalition.org with any questions. Finally, Fourth and the EC are really excited. This year, we've decided to join forces and host live office hours. So those are going to happen twice a week through the end of July, really around program design, things like this. If you have technical questions about the NOFO, again, we really encourage you to email the DOT address. But if you have questions about your application and want to work through those in real time with humans, we are happy to do that with you. So sign up for one of our Zoom sessions. Again, those will be happening 2 times a week through the end of July. All right, moving along. So while some of the resources I'm about to cover can apply to the corridor program, most apply to community grants. So just want to underscore that really quickly. But just a few quick notes about corridor. Again, this has been said, but focus on things that the NEVI formula funds won't fund. And in those cases, think about how to make that charging useful to local residents and underserved communities, not just long distance travelers. We've said it before, but we'll say it again. It's a better business model and it's better for equity. Like last year's, this year's CFI NOFO provides guidance on community engagement. It's an eligible cost, capped at 5% of the total grant receipt. So meaningful public engagement and outreach, which means truly listening to the needs of communities, should be the starting point for any program, including the introduction of electric vehicle technologies. Your strategy and your program design will be more effective, and your proposal will be more compelling if it centers the experiences and needs of communities that have been historically underserved and harmed by discriminatory transportation decisions. That starts with centering the people over the technology. So, of course, if we're applying for funding for charging infrastructure, we need to communicate that, yes, we understand the technology, safety, permitting, and specifications for sites. And we also need to showcase that the selected locations for this technology will actually benefit those that need it, and that we're considering any potential harm. So there are a lot of ways to do community engagement. There are many different ways to approach it that determines the need, time, and resources needed. Some things that could be communicated in proposals include what the approach is through the project lifecycle. For example, for public engagement associated with program design, you could consider neighborhood level tabling in partnership with local community-based organizations, listening sessions, statewide webinars, and community-based needs assessments. And when we're doing this work, we need to make sure that we are asking for feedback from communities and providing additional benefits when we're doing that work. When it comes to increasing EV awareness and adoption, I just want to see if I'm still going. I'm frozen on my side.
We're receiving you. Yeah, you're coming through.
Okay, you're receiving me. I'm not receiving you. So I'm just going to keep moving. So when it comes to increasing EV awareness and adoption, one of the best ways to do that is to ensure that folks have an opportunity to experience that technology firsthand alongside trusted communities in a brand neutral setting. So that could look like making sure you have ride and drives and education events built into your CFI proposal. There's a lot more information about best practices in EV education and outreach. We just published a paper about this. It is hot off the presses as of yesterday. We'll send it in the recap email. Moving over to the multifamily resources. Per the NOFO, and as Brant noted a few minutes ago, under the community program, DOT is interested in community charging and fueling deployment in several focus areas. Applicants are encouraged to indicate which focus areas the project address and how the project benefits the community and expands access to alternative fueling infrastructure. And more than one focus area can be identified. So right now I'm just going to underscore resources for two of those areas. One is neighborhood and multifamily charging, and the other is multi-purpose workplace and destination charging. Though should it be noted that other categories include multimodal hubs and shared use fleets and services, along with community fleets and freight. The resources referenced here provide a pretty good look at advancing access to EV charging at multifamily housing properties. They include a best practice paper from us on model multifamily charging programs. We also provided a link here for the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which is a federal and state EV and EVCI incentives hub. And we're also linked to Joint Offices Community Charging Emerging Multifamily, Curbside, and Multimodal Practices paper. And also there should be an EV Building Codes Toolkit via Plug in America and the EV Charging for All Coalition. So we hope those resources can help provide a framework for understanding a path forward to design programs that benefit multifamily housing properties in your communities. Can't see the slides, so Simbi, if you could go to the next one. All right, we're back. Funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, Fourth, along with our partners, has developed the Electric Vehicle Adoption Leadership Program. So this really helps businesses figure out how to advance clean transportation opportunities and specifically get charging installed for commuters. We've developed a wide variety of tools to support workplace charging. There are a few examples there. One, there's a best practice paper on workplace charging. There's also a list of available rebates and incentives, particularly for workplaces and commercial properties. And really importantly, there's a minority-owned EVSC contractors and installers in a database. There's also a complementary program called Charge at Work, which offers free site assessments. And there's a project builder tool, which can recommend everything from what's the appropriate electric charger, cost estimate, timelines. All those resources and toolkits are on the eval website. So we've offered a ton of resources here, and I really am hopeful you're all able to see them. But be on the lookout for our recap email And we really look forward to seeing you at one of our office hour sessions in the near future. And with that, I will pass it back to Matt.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Kat. And we'll be moving into the Q&A session here. So I'll ask our other panelists to go ahead and come off of video and off of mute. We'll acknowledge at the top of it, we'll be working through a lot of great question sets here, as well as consolidating some of them. If you don't hear your question asked, we promise it's not because we're playing favorites, just trying to be judicious with time, and more than happy to follow up offline and after this webinar too. So maybe to get things started, and Brant, I'll give this one to you first. And this is definitely a common question that we get coming through. What are most common ways that applicants use, what is a helpful approach to meet the 20% cost share match? That is 80% of your grant request is able to go towards the project, but you still have to bring in 20% of the project value. What are some ways we work with partners to help find that and navigate?
Yeah. So, with the corridor program, you have to contract with a private entity in order to go on with the project. They are obligated to do the 20% requirement. I would imagine this question is more geared toward the community program. The 20% match can also be from a private entity there. So once you're awarded, you can then put out an RFP. And within that RFP, you're going to say that you must have at least 20% cost share. And then in that RFP, you can also write in that you could get extra bonus points if you provide more than 20% cost shares, something like that. We've also seen it been written into city budgets where if the funds that you were awarded weren't able to be met with the private entity, that there's a slush fund or an extra fund that would able to offset those costs. One of the things I as a person who works in federal funding, we also need to start looking into elective pay. This isn't going to apply to everyone, but as part of elective pay or direct pay, elective pay is now allowable through tax exempt entities, which are your cities that are on here, so what you can do is with the 30C requirement, which is EV infrastructure, you can get 6% or up to 30% of the total cost of the project with a rebate program from the federal government. Again, you do have to hit prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements for that, but it's something that you should be looking into as you're filling out your budget for this round of funding.
You mentioned it, Brant, and as you said it, we saw the chat just fire off too. You often hear the term grant stack, which is the concept of either taking various federal grants or a mix of federal, state, Inflation Reduction Act tax incentives. I guess to affirm to what you just said, yes, there is stackable potential here. Is there any immediate things to pay attention to, maybe if folks are looking at different incentive programs and if they can come together on a project?
Yeah, so you hit it on the head. You can't stack federal money on top of federal money. Elective pay is not considered federal money in terms of the way that it can be stacked. So you can oftentimes look at your state, your local potential matches. Sometimes you can bring a utility in and they'll help match out. So there's a variety of different ways that you can attack the 20% that you need for the non-federal match. And so it's for those that are struggling to get to that 20% match, there are different avenues. If you want to bring those up into, if you want to bring up your specific example into our one-on-ones or our office hours, we'd be more than happy to try and brainstorm with you certain ideas to get you to that 20%.
That's great. Kat, question for you, and I'll put two questions together here. So one, it's one of the folks tuning in, they're with a statewide chamber serving underserved and Justice 40 communities. So it's a question on if they're eligible to apply. And there's some other questions too on what are some helpful tools? You mentioned some in your presentation, helpful tools for navigating where those Justice 40 census tracts are, or how to go about an initial mapping or assessment of a metro region.
Yeah, I'll start with the mapping piece. So there's a pretty explicit, you can look through in the NOFO, right? We can link right into how you can determine that. We're also happy if in our office hours, if you want to come in and I don't know, or I don't know how to use this tool even to start. We are happy to do that, right? Just to have that conversation. So, but it is there are footnotes all throughout the NOFO. I have it sitting right in front of me, right? All 75 pages of it that can help you determine that. First question about eligible entities. I would look at that criteria that is put through in the NOFO. I don't want to say yes or no right now to the chamber. I believe yes, though they'd be eligible, but double check that criteria as well, especially for statewide. And we did see, for example, in last year's the debrief webinar that we put together in January, that we did find a majority of folks who were able to have combined applications, right? Really work together across municipalities, cities, counties, states. Were very were more likely to be awarded. So that's something to keep in mind.
Thanks for that. That's super helpful. Actually, question to you both. I'll give it to you guys in turn. Another big piece of question is, what is allowable project cost within the CFI grant application? Charging stations makes sense, but what about if we're looking at paving projects or maybe even some of the transformers or switchgear that is needed for helping the charger to operate? Any thoughts or insight that we've seen from working with other projects on how to qualify that or think about what's allowable project cost? And
Yeah,
Brant, maybe first.
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, so the transformer is a no. I believe in the NOFO itself, there's a great diagram of what non-eligible expenses are and eligible expenses are for charging infrastructure itself. So the transformer is considered front of the meter or a non-eligible expense, but there are eligible expenses like the electric panel, the charging infrastructure itself. Battery energy storage systems are a part of it. So if you're thinking about a resiliency strategy where you have a battery component, and if those battery components are tied to, let's say, a solar panel, that is an eligible expense because it's considered behind the meter. These are all eligible project costs that you can have. You also can, an eligible expense is also for the lease of the land that you're putting the infrastructure on. That is also an allowable cost. And I can't remember. And Kat, you can supplement my answer, and then if there's a second part to that question, you'll have to ask it again there, Matt.
I think you're hitting a lot of it. I mean, if you have the NOFO in front of you, folks, all this really starts on page 24 through 27 on eligible project costs for the both the corridor and the community program. I do really want to underscore for the community program, though, that education and outreach is allowable. It's up to 5%, right? So that's important stuff. But again, pages 24 through 27, I could read them all, but that's where it's located.
And maybe the thing to acknowledge here that everyone's been doing is this is going to be very project by project specifics. There's semantics, right, in the way that these designs are coming together. So it is a thing of we can give you the lead intel and always happy to talk it more through. We also did get a number of questions on land acquisition or those moments. Indeed, this is an allowable element to it. For instance, we did see in some round one awarded projects, it just was an honest moment of land had to be acquired to put the charging station into operation there. That's obviously a very straightforward element to that, but always happy to walk through what those pieces can look like too. Let's see. Next question. Let's see. Back to the 20% cost share. So the question is, if a local government is requiring the applicant to pay, if a local government is the applicant and pays 20% cost share, could they subsequently receive payment under direct pay or also require the vendor to be bringing in some of that cost share match? Brand, to what you were just sharing in that first question, the answer feels like a yes, but I guess anything more helpful to dial in for that?
Yes. Yeah, so what you're going to do is with elective pay, as long as you're in it, so there's a eligibility locator map that is on the website. I don't have that currently available, but you can certainly find the eligibility locator for 30C infrastructure. You're gonna that map, I think, has says that 62% of the population is in an area where it is eligible. So that's wonderful. Over almost 2/3 of the population will be able to, exercise these elective pay option. And with that elective pay, so you're going to have some forms, some tax forms that you're probably unfamiliar with that you're going to have to fill out. But overall, you're going to put in your project. Let's say that it happened in 2023. You're gonna do your tax forms, April 15th of 2024. Again, elective pay is happening right now. And for most cities, there's a tax exemption that you can get up until November 15th of 2024 for any project that you put in 2023. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take that total project cost for those electric vehicle charging stations. You're going to submit your tax forms, your required tax forms, and then you would be able to use that money as part of your budgeting for your CFI project or any other federally funded program that allows elective pay. For those that are a bit unfamiliar with elective pay, the EC does have an elective pay website where we have annotated tax forms to help you along to get you the money that you rightfully deserve. So we have that both for the EV infrastructure, and then we have it for the commercial vehicles, clean commercial vehicle tax credit, which is 45W.
That's helpful, Brant. And maybe a last question on cost share. We have a lot of cost share questions coming through, so I'm noticing a trend, and maybe the first topic for our first office hour. Kat, I'll give you this one. There's always this thing whenever you're looking at cost share in a grant application where you do have to cite how is the budget going to work out and play. But when does the piper come for their pay? When do we have to have that cost share locked in? And at what step of the process? Is it at the application? Is it at the if awarded the contract as that gets signed with FHWA? Any helpful insight that you can give to that?
Yeah, you need a plan. And I think, there's a lot of sources as well. I just want to underline like utilities can be really great sources for potential match. Obviously, your EVSC partners. There might be other folks along the way who want to be a part of the project. So I just want to underscore that. And I do think hearing all these questions about match that have come through the chat, that would be a great first topic for us to address, right? And be happy to talk through that. I also want to underscore Brant had noted up front, like, specifically, I believe this one's in corridor, but don't get me wrong. Correct me if I'm incorrect here, Brant. But you make your best efforts in the application to say this is the cost share, right? But you won't be penalized. You will have to make up that cost share, right? But it's not a penalty. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, thanks for that, Kat. Yeah, a lot of just welcome to the internal calls that we often have as we commiserate and compare notes. Kevin, a quick question for you, and understand if it's a moment of email in and we can get you a better answer. So within the NOFO, it states that fiscal year 2024 funds are available for obligation through September 30th, 2027, essentially looking at what the time horizon is for the projects. Is it dictated in the NOFO, or is there additional guidance on when the funds must be expended by, if that makes sense, or essentially awarded funds to be spent?
Yes, thank you. Really quickly on the cost share question, there is some additional detail on pages 22 and 23 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity that expands a little bit and provides a little bit more context. On the question of by which date obligated funds must be expended, on page 18 of the NOFO, the exact quote is, once funds are obligated, CFI program funds are available until expended. But if the question itself was referring to something more specific, I'd highly encourage you to look at the resources already available on the CFI website from FHWA. Submit the question yourself to FHWA, or look at some of the variety of resources at a more general level that are available on the Joint Office's webpage, which I'll link in the chat.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And we can't emphasize enough too, we also submitting questions to those federal resource emails. So I appreciate your replugging that. Is an amazing resource and really helpful as folks dig in. Maybe a last question or two, and just trying to round out our time here. Let's see. Sorry, I have a very long running question set, so we'll be sure to share out the respective insight. Kat, to you, question on when it says state or local authorities in the eligible entities section, does this include schools, especially K-12, or other types of educational institutions? And also, actually, maybe you had mentioned a lot of special work and leadership on multifamily dwellings. I guess any thoughts on those types of partners that can be eligible or good to target for inclusion?
Yeah, that is a great question. I almost want to kick that to Kevin, right? Because they have to have there's some sort of transportation function, right? So Kevin, do you have an answer to that one right off the top of your head?
The
And,
answer off the top of my head always to refer to the notice of funding opportunity or to direct it to WA. But what I would say is that if you look specifically at the table on page 20 of the notice of funding opportunity, it identifies which entities are eligible under the community program, the corridor program, and applicants won't have to worry or indicate. There's also a different set of requirements for what's called the NEVI 10 funding, which is partially what's going into fund the reconsideration of round one applications. But looking at that table on page 20 will identify not just what type of entity is eligible, but it'll also provide you with citation that provides even greater detail for what each of those categories of applicants means, who falls under that category, et cetera. If you have any doubts in your mind before you write the application, I'd encourage you to submit the question because the last thing anyone wants to do is to submit something that can't be considered. So it's a great question to ask early and often.
That's a great question. Just underscore, I think it was bottom of page 20, and I know Brant also included that table in his presentation as well, which will be going out to everyone today.
Yeah, thank you for that, guys. Well, let's do one last question. We'll do a quick round robin on it to actually just zoom a little bit back out to as folks are thinking pulling together projects. A lot of private entities or just those non-governmental partners tuning in today. A simple question: what are helpful pathways? Just putting on your hat from that perspective, how can they best engage, be supportive of applications that are going in? Maybe this is a good example of what are good examples of public-private partnership, or how those private entities, be it a charging vendor, site host, can be partner and party to an application. Brant, I'll go to you first, and then Kat, and then Kevin to close us out for any helpful thoughts to that.
Yeah. So in the NOFO, eligible applicants are not private entities, so they're ineligible. But that doesn't mean that they can't partner with an eligible applicant in order to get in order to help with the funding. And then, of course, if they're able to provide match for at least 20%, if not more, that makes it even more. That makes it even better, at least for the community portion of it, right? So I encourage. We've got we've got a lot of different avenues that we're talking with people on. One of the things that we want to do is we want private entities to be able to take advantage of this. Of course, if it's a private entity, it needs to be publicly accessible, but private entities should still be able to have them, whether they're in like a parking lot that they own or anything like that. So we want to make sure that we can connect people with with the funds that they can have. And so what I would be doing is I would be talking to eligible applicants. So the first thing I would do is I would probably talk to your city. They're potentially likely to do that. But you can also go a little bit bigger. You can go into your MPO, your municipal planning organization, and then you can go even a step farther to see if there's a state application. So because states are applicable. So I'd be looking at avenues that are eligible applicants. I'd start the most local first, and then I would expand horizons, because we've heard multiple states considering putting in an application this year. Of course, they might do a corridor application, but if they get enough private entities that are really interested in doing a community application, a state can do that on behalf of these private entities to do a community one as well. So there are pathways to accessing this funding, and it's just getting a little creative in how you approach that situation.
Yeah, I mean, heavy plus one to everything Brant just said. Match obviously is a great place to go. You also can fill out that form, right? Or email the Electrification Coalition, or the one that we dropped for fourth. Again, we're working with a broad consortium of folks who can potentially match you up in regions. Also, many states have started putting out RFIs. I'm sure lots of folks on the private side are looking at those already, and beginning to host explanatory webinars. That's one piece. I'd also ask your local utility what they're hearing, right, as well. So those would be my very quick pieces of advice in the last minute we have.
Kevin, I'll give you
And
some of
then
the last.
I'll try not to repeat any of what was just said because it's all a fantastic context and advice. What I just suggest is don't limit yourself in your creativity because the market is rapidly evolving and expanding. And there are so many different entities that are identifying that they can participate in the new clean zero emission fueling network. It's not just developers who only focus on the development of charging, although traditional, retail fuel providers and charging networks and refueling systems are already out there. Also, small, mom and pop shops are seeing the value and benefit of providing access to clean transportation infrastructure, not just for the value it provides to drivers, but also for the value it provides to them by having folks come to their location, be that at workplaces, at homes, with public accessibility, or commercial locations. There's a huge variety of opportunities out there. And I think if we looked at what happened in round one, all of the wonderful applications that came in and those that were awarded, we saw a wide variety of approaches. And we're really looking forward to seeing what comes through this round and what everyone in the community and all those who haven't yet, who aren't on this webinar now and haven't yet even thought about it. There's a lot of time to put together a compelling, creative project, and please do take advantage of all the resources through FHWA, through the Joint Office, as well as those that Fourth and Electrification Coalition identified. So thank you again to all those for hosting, Kat, Brant, and Matt. It was a pleasure to be on, but really, it's going to be nothing but excitement moving forward, even though it's a lot of detail too. So thanks for the chance and looking forward to seeing what y'all come up with.
Well, thank you, Kevin, as well for joining. So appreciate your taking the time and sharing the insight from the Joint Office. On behalf of EC, really appreciate our colleagues over at Fourth for tag teaming on this. Indeed, this is just a time to be coming together. $1.3 billion being made available, the largest of its type. It's an exciting time. It's a little nerve-wracking, but also at the same time, so many partners out there that want to support this. I'll leave folks with the last piece. You heard us mention it before. We'll be doing collective office hours. It is a new approach where we're trying to create some of the easier clearing spaces where folks can come together, especially to compare notes and compare context to what they're experiencing. So that just got dropped in the link, in the chat by Stuart. We'll also be sharing out recording as well as web links and presentation that we shared here today. But I'll finish that off with, so appreciate everyone tuning in. Again, let's keep the conversation going and especially be sure we're getting you as best resource and material that you need to succeed. So thank you again, everyone. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day.